Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start, I'd like to ask everyone a quick question. How many of you have ever had a client, when asking who is the owner of the company, the client confidently and swiftly replies, I am. And then you ask for that famous organogram. Yeah, there's some giggles. And suddenly, it looks like a Netflix conspiracy theory or series. Then there's a holding company, obviously owned by another company, owned by a trust, whose beneficiaries are another trust. And somehow, someone's cousin in Mauritius appears halfway through. At that point, you're not doing financial planning anymore. You're auditioning for CSI South Africa, CSI ML, FICA, AML. What's the famous one that I can't pronounce?
Terror and proliferation financing.
Thank you, Lilani. Yeah. And just when you finally think you found the owner, someone says, no, that's just the nominee. And you're thinking, of course it is. Today's session is about making sure we don't stop at the first name we see on the paperwork. We're going to follow the breadcrumbs, or since it's Christmas in July, we're going to follow the wrapping paper all the way to the real person behind the structure. Because under FICA, the ultimate beneficial owner isn't the company, it isn't the trust, it isn't the nominee, and it certainly isn't the elf doing the wrapping. It is the actual human being behind the structure. On that festive note, welcome to everyone online, and those of you joining us in person at our offices. For those of you joining online, I can assure you, listen, I know it's way past breakfast now, but there's no eggnog involved. I do not have eggnog for breakfast. I do not have eggnog for lunch. I'm simply taking a moment to admire the ultimate beneficial faces in front of me today, because that's what today's session is all about. For those of you who have joined us for our first session, I am Jiten Sipasad. I'm the Regional Distribution Manager of Fedgroup Joburg. And joining me in a very festive themed outfit, our Head of GRC, Lilani Zayman. Lilani, are you trying to show us that compliance has become more festive?
So this is my Christmas compliance penguin, and also if compliance isn't fun, you're not doing it right.
Okay, so hopefully today we see the fun element of compliance a bit more. So just a bit of general housekeeping rules. I've got Ray who will be monitoring the chat. As you may imagine, today's content is a bit heavy, so we will be taking questions at the end of the sessions. If there's any questions that we obviously can't get to, we will therefore respond afterwards. And if there's any requirement for slides and stuff, we will be emailing out to you guys. For those of you, there again, as I mentioned, joining us for the first time, if you haven't joined our previous sessions, you can find them on YouTube. And just note that if you're viewing them on YouTube, there's no CBD required, but this session as well will be on YouTube. So Lilani, I think it's time we stopped admiring the wrapping paper and started unwrapping some UBOs.
Perfect. I'm quickly going to share my screen for everyone online. If you can just give me a thumbs up if you can see it.
Cool, we're good to go.
Thanks, Marco. So we do have a sort of a short little agenda just to give you an idea of what you are in for today.
Yeah, so I think most importantly, what will we unwrap today, Lilani? The legal obligation, I know that makes you smile. That's basically the heart of what we're doing today, and it gives everyone a clear understanding of the why. And then we look at what is a UBO.
Yeah, OBO.
I've been saying OBO from the morning, eh? And there's various UBO scenarios thereafter that we would unpack. And then the exciting part for the financial planners on the call, I mean, getting practical, that's when probably I wake up again. I know we don't love the legal side of it. And then we look at the information requirements. And lastly, today's session will be a bit repetitive, so please bear with us. We do a recap and summary. So the reason for that is we're trying to get a specific message across. And hopefully, at the end of today's session, we would have enlightened you and made your lives a bit easier when it comes to actually identifying the actual UBOs that exist within structures.
Yes, and if you think about it, identifying a UBO is also repetitive because sometimes it feels like you are doing the same thing over and over again, and you are as you move through all the layers. So, yeah, bear with us. There is repetitive sort of themes across it, but for good reason. So, if we start in almost the beginning, what are the UBO requirements? And beneficial ownership matters because of the risk and the responsibility. So the risk is always that criminals can abuse companies, trusts, or other legal structures to hide money, usually derived from criminal activities, but also the responsibility that rests upon accountable institutions is, and it's a legal responsibility. The FICA Act says so, so you have to do it. But you need to understand who really owns or controls the structure you are dealing with. So when you have a natural person client, it's easy, it's the face in front of you, but your companies don't walk into your office. It's usually a person that represents a company, but there might be layers behind that company. The company can be owned by another company or a trust, and your responsibility in terms of the law is to understand who sits in all of those layers and who ultimately benefits from the structure or who controls it. So bear with me, I have to share the law with you now. So usually when people ask why do we have to do FICA or why do we have to do UBO FICA, the answer is clear. Section 21 of FICA says so.
So I mean, we laugh and joke about it all the time, but this gives us a guideline as to where to actually look for it. So, obviously when you get pushback from clients, because at the end of the day, there's multiple layers. Obviously, we asking our advisors to do a certain thing, and that goes to the actual client, where there is that level of friction, because obviously that scope has gone a lot more defined now in terms of what we're looking for.
But also FICA's been around for 25 years, so I think there were people born before FICA, and they have no excuse, but even a lot of people born after FICA, and it's just sort of, they're already old enough to do business. So I don't think anybody's got an excuse not to FICA anymore. But bear with me. I'm going to spend a few minutes just on the legal foundation. But you need to understand what the law asks of you so that you better understand exactly what you need to do to structure the UBO FICA. So Section 21 says when an accountable institution, and we know the definition by now, most people in financial services are accountable institutions, when you engage with a prospective client to enter into a single transaction or to establish a business relationship. And this is important. If you just deal with them once, or if you establish a relationship and you deal with them more frequently, either which way, you have to FICA them. So you have to, in the course of concluding that single transaction or establishing that business relationship, and in accordance with your RMCP, establish and verify the identity of a client. So if it's a human being, a normal, natural person, it's simple. You do it by getting a copy of an ID document, making sure that you know who you are dealing with. It does become a little bit more tricky when that client is acting on behalf of another person. There you need to establish and verify the identity of the other person, and also the client's authority to establish the business relationship or to conclude that single transaction on behalf of that other person. And where another person's acting on behalf of a client, you also need to establish and verify the identity of that other person and the other person's authority to act on behalf of the client. You can quickly see how wide the circle becomes when you read the definition, but especially 21(1) B and C applies when we deal with juristic entities. And then 21(B), so usually like when an act gets promulgated, there is numbers that follow upon each other. When you see alphabetical letters that pop up, then you know something changed. So Section 21(B) wasn't there when the FIC got promulgated, or the FICA Act got promulgated, but it was added later, and it is because the authorities realized the risk almost of criminals exploiting legal entities. So for legal persons, trusts, and partnerships, there are additional due diligence requirements. So if a client is a legal person or a natural person acting on behalf of a partnership, a trust, or a similar arrangement, the accountable institution must establish the nature of the client's business. So you need to know who you're doing business with, and then also the ownership and control structure of the client. So you have to ask the questions, but also these are the type of questions you ask under normal circumstances when you just try and figure out who you're doing business with, and things that need to flow into a financial needs analysis. Then if your client is a legal person, you have to establish the identity of the beneficial owner by firstly determining each natural person who independently or together with other people has a controlling ownership interest in the legal person. So who owns that corporate structure? Then if in doubt, and if you can't find an owner per se, then you need to find the person who can exercise control through other means. So this includes through ownership or control of another legal person, partnership or trust. And here we get to those almost the onion layers where one company is owned by another one and we go up the chain. And then if no one's identified, each natural person who exercises control over management. So here we look at executive officers or directors or managers who make day-to-day decisions on behalf of that legal entity. And the most important bit is the accountable institution needs to take reasonable steps to verify the beneficial owner's identity. So you can't just ask somebody who's the UBO and they tell you in a WhatsApp and then you move on because they said so. So for legal structures, you need to verify it against some sort of a document. So if it's a PTY Limited, you have to look at the CIPC records. If it's a trust, you need to at least consult the trustee to establish who you're doing business with. But we'll unpack all of that in today's session. Then if you are dealing with anybody who's acting on behalf of a partnership, you have to establish the identifying name of the partnership. Usually easy if you get a copy of a partnership agreement. Then you need to identify every partner. And this includes members of an in commandite partnership, which is fancy Latin for a limited partnership. So the general partners usually act on behalf of the partnership. But you can't just stop at the general partners. You need to identify anybody who is a partner. And we also get strange things like anonymous partnerships, but in today's day and age, it's also not something we can deal with. So remember, FIC says you can't do business with fictitious or anonymous people or shell companies or all of those. So if somebody's created an anonymous partnership, good for them. If they want to do business, then they need to, for FICA purposes, tell us who all the partners in that anonymous partnership is. I've also had people who hide behind POPIA and said, well, it's their personal information, they don't have to share it, but they need to read the act better, because POPIA says if you need to find the information for legal purposes, such as FICA, then it's not personal, it's not a secret.
Yeah, just another way of showing that everything is connected somehow.
Everything is connected. Nothing happens in isolation. You've listened to the previous training sessions, I'm proud. Then if a partner is a legal person, so again, we're in onion territory here. So if a partner is not a natural human being, but you've got legal people who are partners in that partnership, you need to look through that second layer of partnership. Or a trust can even be a partner, but still you need to look at those legal entities in isolation to find the beneficial owners. Then any natural person who exercises executive control over the partnership, and each natural person who's been authorized to transact on behalf of the partnership. And lastly, take reasonable steps to verify the identities of the natural people, so that you know who you are dealing with. So obviously, on paper and reading it, you sort of have an idea, but I promise a lot of today we are going to spend almost unpacking all of this in pictures, so it's not just the words, and it's a little bit more practical to understand. If you deal with a trust, almost similar to a partnership, you need to establish the identity of that trust. So most trusts have names and numbers, so trust deed again is a good place to start to find your trust name and number. Then you need to establish the address of the master of the High Court where the trust is registered. So remember, only the master of the High Court has the authority to register a trust. There is an office in almost every province, so different provinces, different offices, but formal stamp, formal paperwork, you'll know where it's registered. And then in respect of the founders of the trust, you have to establish the identity of each founder and the beneficial owner behind any founder if that founder is a legal person. So remember, the founder or the settler creates the trust. So they're the reason why the trust exists. It can be a natural person, it can be a juristic entity. If it is, there's another layer to look through. With regards to your trustees, same process. So you have to establish the identity of every trustee. So usually your trustees are named in your trust deed. You also have a letter of authority that appoints all your trustees. They can change from time to time, and it can also be possible that your trustee isn't a human being. it's another juristic entity, and I think by now you know the recipe. So if that trustee is a corporate trustee, it's another layer that you need to look through. And then ultimately, almost where you can stop when you look at trust, is you have to establish the identity of every single beneficiary named in the trust instrument. So sometimes it's easy. People are named by name, and if you're lucky, even an ID number, so that you can match it against an ID document. But we've also seen trusts where it's either a class of beneficiaries, or we love it when we read all the children born from our marriage. And then you now need to consult additional sources to figure out how many children have been born from said marriage. So again, I see heads nod here.
Maybe they're nodding because they need a 5-minute break after that.
Well, that too. But so clearly it's not easy, but we'll explain how to get through all of this today. And then, as per all the other instances, you as the accountable institution need to take reasonable steps to verify these particulars. So you can't just accept that a trustee is a trustee because they say so on the application form. You need to verify it either against a trust deed. Now, if the application form and the trust deeds don't match up, then you need to ask for an updated letter of authority or those type of documents, because everything is subject to change. But in essence, so almost the one thing I want everybody to keep in mind when we start to unpack UBOs is whenever you start a business relationship or just carry out a once-off transaction with any juristic entity, including companies, trusts, partnerships, you have to identify the real natural people behind it. You can't stop at a piece of paper. You need to find a human being.
Cool. If you can't name the real human beings behind the legal entity, then you don't know who your client is, eh? It's as simple as that. Simple, not so simple?
Well, this is basically the crux of today's session.
Simple for you, not so
find
simple
a human.
for everyone else?
Well, this is now the thing. So in essence, the principle is simple, find the human. But now we've seen how people get creative when they set up legal entities, and your companies owned by companies, up to however many layers. So this is where the tricky bits come in, and our hope and dream today is to almost translate all the tricky bits into something simple and practical so people understand what they need to do.
Cool.
But it all starts with just asking the right question.
Who ultimately owns or controls the client? It's as simple as that, eh? I guess.
Yeah, you stole my question, but yes, it is that question. So if you don't know who owns or controls the client, then you again don't know your client, but you need to know who you are dealing with and understand the legal structure you are dealing with, and then understand who sits behind it. But sometimes people care more about who signed the mandate, or who the admin contact is, or who the company says the owner is, and all good questions and things to know. The tricky bit, and almost where you need to look out for red flags, is if whoever signed the mandate isn't really who owns the company. If you now verify it against documents, you need to ask why and understand why. Or if a person's an admin contact but they're not really a UBO or owner, then you need to make sure that that admin contact is actually authorized to act on behalf of the company. So there's almost the legal bit, and then there's the practical bit. So on paper and technically and legally, and in terms of the Master's Office or the CIPC, you've got records. And then there's things that happen practically when people fill in forms. And you always need to make sure that those two marry.
Well, as Santa says, we're looking for the person at the top of the gift chain, not the elf wrapping the presents, eh?
Exactly, but
in a nutshell, that's what you just explained, eh?
yes, but sometimes that elf also has sort of power over whatever he's doing. So you find the person on top, but you also need to figure the elf. So if he's touching your present, then you need to know who he is and why he's doing what he's doing. So legal obligations, again, everybody knows we've got the FICA Act that explains everything, but if you just suffered through those definitions with me, then you know it's not always that simple. So what the FIC does from time to time is it gives us guidance notes and public compliance communications, and specifically for UBOs, we've got guidance note 7A and PCC 59 that helps translate all the requirements for beneficial ownership in terms of Section 21 of the FIC Act.
Before you go any further, just by show of hands, has anyone heard of Guidance Note 7A and PCC 59, either online or in the room? Okay, so I'm assuming that's the compliance team that's sitting in there. Right? Cool. So, I mean, Lelani's even brought proof, because in law you need proof and evidence. So this is the gift, apparently. Gift to some of us, not to all of us. So PCC 59 isn't about the legal entity on paper. It's about the human ultimately in control or benefiting. So there's two elements which we speak about here. It's control or benefiting.
Exactly. But yeah, before we dive into it, and you touched on it, but I do want everybody to think about those guidance notes and the PCCs a little bit differently. So I know most of you have better things to do, but please do yourself the favor, read through them from time to time and translate them, because the guidance notes and the PCCs are almost the biggest gifts, and especially with regards to UBOs, the biggest gifts the FIC can give you, because yeah, it's detailed. It explains exactly what you need to do when you deal with various juristic entities, but a lot of today is based on it. So again, we are translating it, and hopefully we're going to make it a little bit more practical. But also at the core of today, just going forward, whenever you deal with UBOs, know that there is no room to hide anything. So whenever you deal with a corporate structure and somebody doesn't want to share information, whether it's names or IDs, ownership percentage, control, yeah, red flag, and you need to almost be persistent enough to push through, because ultimately you need to identify and verify all the way to the top until you find that last ultimate beneficial owner.
If Santa can track 1 million of children worldwide, okay, please, the advisors online, please don't hold anything against me. Then you can find the UBO of a legal entity.
Exactly, it's not that difficult. I mean, Santa makes magic, UBOs aren't that difficult. But if we quickly unpack UBOs, and I know Jathen keeps on calling it the jargon, but
It's
it
a
is
famous word.
important.
I mean, it's jargon for everyone else besides compliance.
Well, again, I'm trying to translate it here, but since you are so clever, what's a legal person?
You're trying to test me in the afternoon. I know it's a graveyard shift and all, but I'm assuming he's not a lawyer.
No, definitely not. So your lawyers have legal knowledge, but a legal person, as defined in FIC specifically, is any person other than a natural person. So a natural person, somebody with a face and a heartbeat and hopefully an ID document. So a legal person is any other type of person outside of the natural person definition that establishes a business relationship or enters into a single transaction with an accountable institution, and includes a person incorporated as a company, a closed corporation, a foreign company, or any other form. So again, one of those wide definitions. Basically anything can fit in there. So any other form of corporate arrangement or association, but excludes a trust, a partnership, and a sole proprietor. So this doesn't mean that trust, partnerships, and sole props don't need to be FICA'd. They just get FICA'd differently. So there's a way of doing UBO FICA on a legal person technically, and then on trusts, partnerships, and sole props. So that being said, how would you define a beneficial owner?
I'm glad you didn't pick up on me saying assuming before, but I'm going to assume again since you didn't pick up on that. Someone who benefits and someone who owns.
Oh, it's kind of in the name, no?
So some things can be taken at face value.
Yeah.
But not everything.
Not everything. But ultimately, when in doubt, go to the definitions. But a beneficial owner is either a natural person who directly or indirectly ultimately owns or exercises effective control of a client of an accountable institution, or an AI. So today, if we say AI, it's accountable institution in terms of FIC and not the machines. So yeah, there's a lot of confusion, but just to be clear, or a legal person, partnership, or trust that owns or exercises effective control of a client of an AI, or exercises control of a client of an AI on whose behalf a transaction is being conducted, and includes 4 legal persons, partnerships, and trusts, each natural person who independently or together with others own or exercises control over the legal person, partnership, and trust.
So
it's a lot.
Like we joke around, but I'm pretty sure people are thinking, can AI be seen as an accountable institution, like AI as in artificial intelligence?
No. So
Thank
maybe
you.
a session for another day, but remember, what is AI? It's just it's an agent on a PC. So up until the point where an agent gets a registration number at the CIPC or ID document at Home Affairs, if you use AI or agents to do anything for you, there is still a human being or an entity behind that that's responsible for that AI agent. The law might change, but let's talk about it when that happens. But for now, today, it's either a natural person with a face and an ID document that we're dealing with, or a legal structure, but those legal structures need to exist somewhere. So either registered companies with the CIPC, or trusts with the master, or any other shape or form of an entity, but there's usually a founding document, a registration number, directors and people who act on behalf of it. So for me, and you know my head works in pictures, it's easier to explain UBOs in this sort of diagram. So like I said, UBO is short for ultimate beneficial owner, and in essence, that human being behind the structure. But just a silly example, so if company ABC comes to you and wants to establish a business relationship, that's the layer in pink. It might just have one shareholder and you're lucky, but usually the structures look like this for whatever reasons they set up. So company pink might be owned by company blue. Company blue then has a trust or a partnership that owns that company, and behind that trust or partnership, or even other company, there might then be beneficiaries or shareholders, but the last face you find in this whole structure will then be your UBO. How you map this whole thing is just asking the right questions. So when you deal with company pink, you will ask them who's your shareholder, or you ask them for an organogram, and then almost repeating that same process through all the layers until you end at the last. And this is ultimate, means the very last one. It's not the first face you see through that whole structure. Ultimate beneficial owner means the whole. You need to almost factor through that whole structure and find the last human being looking back at you.
So we can also bring a little bit of a more human element to it. Like how I see it is, you either get a Ferrero, which is nice gold wrapping with something nice inside, which is very straightforward, or you can get an onion with multiple layers, which you don't want to really.
And more layers, the more you cry.
Yeah,
Yes.
or multiple onions within an onion.
But yeah, well, since you said Ferrero, you can't eat the foil layer. So that's important. You need to start to unwrap through all of those. So you take out the little paper thing, layer one, then you take out the foil wrapper, because again, don't eat that. And then you start to get to the middle. So your UBO is almost the heart of your sweetie, and not all the layers. And the same with an onion. So you need to peel through all of those layers until you get it. And almost that being said, a UBO is always a human. That's the golden rule. It's a human being, a real living person with an ID and a birth certificate, who looks back at you and who owns that structure. A lot of people make the mistake to stop at the first trust or the second holding company, or when they are UBO fatigued, wherever they can't ask questions anymore, and that's never good enough. You have to look through the last structure and find the last actual human being. Even if you find 5 humans throughout that process and you still find a trust after all of that, then you know that trust isn't your UBO either. You need to go and find the beneficiaries of that trust. So like you said, there are various different scenarios, and the one in the top left is almost your Ferrero Rocher example. So just a few layers and then you get to like chocolate goodness. But what we see most of the time is that bottom level, and usually the one at the right in the bottom that looks like an onion. And the more layers you see, the more you start to cry. But yeah, you can't stop at the first few faces you see. Like I said, you have to go through all those layers. And hopefully today we'll give you some tissues if your eyes water up through all the onion layers, and enable you to identify UBOs easier with a few practical examples. But what I need you to remember is when you identify UBOs, you always look through all the juristic, corporate, legal layers or levels to find that last human being. The one with a face, somebody with an ID document, or at least a birth certificate. And please remember from now on, when you read UBO, that O turns into a smiley face as a reminder that UBO FICA is not that bad. You can smile through it.
So are you saying I came up with something new until the
Are you taking credit for the chocolate one now?
No, not the chocolate. the ultimate beneficial faces, because essentially that's the easy way for everyone to remember it by.
Owner needs to have a face.
Cool.
Okay. See,
I'll take credit
FICA's
for
fun,
that.
and you can
Can
take
be fun.
credit for that. Okay, so PCC 59 gives us sort of a 3-step process of elimination to find the UBOs. So like I said many times now, and I'm going to keep on repeating it until it's sort of cemented in everybody's brains, beneficial owners are always natural people, human beings, ID, face, birth certificate. So firstly, the way of trying to establish beneficial ownership is trying to figure out who has controlling interest. Controlling interest means ownership. So a natural person is regarded as having controlling ownership or interest if they can make or influence the decisions of that legal entity, if they can pass resolutions, or if they control the day-to-day business operations of a client. So I'm going to sort of chuck out a little bit of a nugget here, but we're going to unpack it later. But the FIC recommends applying a 5% rule. So keep that in mind. I'm not going to detail it too much now. There are more slides to follow, but there is a percentage ownership threshold. If you can't establish anybody with a big enough ownership percentage, then you need to go and look at control by other means. So a person can control an entity in ways other than ownership through, for example, and you mentioned it in the beginning, nominee companies or powers of attorney or any other arrangement that gives that person the power to influence that legal structure. So accountable institutions now need to look at how that client actually operates and how the money moves and almost who controls the money. Because remember, the point of FICA is to try and prevent money laundering and terror and proliferation financing and all of those naughty things. So if somebody can have a decision about where the money goes, then that person has enough controlling interest to potentially do naughty things with that legal structure, and that's why we need to identify them. But now, also important to remember, if someone outside of the official structure appears to be in control, you need to treat them like a beneficial owner. So even if they have no shareholding, but they still have enough power in whatever shape or form to control that whole structure, then they're still not technically a shareholder or a beneficial owner, but they have enough power to almost act like one of those and control the company. And it's a lot of times not what people say they are, but it's what they actually do. So you need to look through what is put on paper and see what the action is. And that's, again, it's not risk-based, but it's sort of outcomes-based. But the outcome impacts the risk. Now, this is all FICA, but since you mentioned Kofi...
But you're talking about outcomes-based approach. So.
Well, I'm glad that Kofi session also stuck in your mind, so we'll have more of those. But since you opened the Kofi door, also just side note, remember the moment Kofi becomes law, and it is in Parliament right now, where FICA is just a requirement in terms of the FIC Act, going forward, every financial institution that's being governed under Kofi, FICA compliance becomes a licensing requirement. So if you don't comply with FICA, then that's grounds for you to lose your Kofi license. So just the sticks becoming bigger and heavier.
So PCC 59, Section 21.
Go and read them, make them your friends.
So they're all not falling away with Kofi coming in, they're just part of it, and they become more legislative now.
More important, yes. Then the last step, sorry for sort of going into a side discussion, but the last process of elimination. So now if you can't find somebody who owns enough, or you can't find somebody who controls by other means, you need to see who controls management. So this option should only be used after you've tried to establish one or two. And here the focus shifts to natural people who control the management of that entity. So this is somebody who can make decisions about what the company does, usually executive officers like directors or senior managers. So examples of documents that you can use to identify any of these 3 steps. So to identify ownership, for a company, you look at a share certificate or a shareholder agreement or a share register, organogram even. For a trust, you need to read through the trustee to see who the beneficiaries are. Then examples of documents that indicate control. This is now board resolutions who might sort of say that some people are authorized to act on behalf of the company, or a letter of appointment or a power of attorney, nominee agreement, all of those. And then examples of documents indicating management powers. Again, a board resolution allowing directors to act on behalf of a company, letter of appointment, for example, allowing trustees to act on behalf of a trust. So there's a long list, and they differ from entity to entity, but it's all documented in the PCC for future reference.
So process of elimination, I think that's quite important as well. So show your process of elimination, and we're going to touch on some of the things that you love as well now. So obtain and retain clear evidence that the full process of elimination was followed in identifying the UBOs of a legal structure or a legal person, sorry. The evidence must show that each step and all of the information were properly considered and that the final outcome is supported by documentation and reasoning at all levels where appropriate. So there again, coming back to documentation, which all the
And
advisors
that
in the room are
old
used
saying, if it's not documented, it's not done.
to. So there again,
So,
proof.
exactly. If somebody tells you the beneficiaries are on a WhatsApp voice note, that's
Yeah.
not good enough. So you have an idea, and at least now you can match that voice note to the actual trustee to see who they are. But you need to find paper, you need to keep paper, and remember, if the regulators come and ask questions, you need to have those documents available at hand to demonstrate that you actually asked the documents. And it's not a once-off process. Remember, ongoing monitoring every now and again, depending on the risk rating, you need to ask for updated documents because things change. So we are going to start to get practical now, but almost to lead you into it. So the gifts under this tree is all the various different types of corporate entities. And from all those little blocks and boxes, you can see that, not all legal entities are the same. So listed companies function quite different to unlisted companies. CCs aren't the same. We've got trusts and partnerships and schools and universities, retirement funds. So many, many different forms of corporate entities that you will deal with from time to time. But the most important thing here is to figure out who you're dealing with, because the different kind of wrapping around that corporate entity gift of yours sort of requires different unwrapping techniques. So you open a wrap box differently than you do sort of a gift bag, and tissue paper is easier to take off than sellotape. So once you understand who you're dealing with, then you know how you need to unwrap them to get to your UBO.
Yeah, just looking at how people unwrap gifts as well. You get some who meticulously do it, and then
Step
some
by
will
step.
just and then some will just tear it apart. So what you're basically saying is, don't tear it apart.
Well, no, you can actually do you boo, whatever you want to do. But the most important here is whatever your unwrapping technique is, it needs to be documented in your RMCP to think about it. So also, you can't treat a trust like a company. So if you are dealing with a listed company and you ask them for a trust deed, they're going to sort of question your sanity. So you have to understand the legal structure that you are dealing with and then ask the right documents. But how you ask in your technique, it's up to you. It just needs to make sense, firstly, comply with the Act, and you need to demonstrate in your RMCP.
Cool. Let's look at the unwrapping method. So let's get a bit practical. Yeah. Step one, most important one, obviously, read the label. So what is the nature of the juristic client, company, CC, trust, partnership, MPC, MPO, or any other legal form? I think it's important to remember, as you mentioned before, and as we've just illustrated now, different kind of wrapping requires different unwrapping techniques.
Exactly.
So it's as simple as that, eh?
Know who you're dealing with and know how to deal with them.
Cool. Step two, shake the box. So that's a bit of an interesting one, depending on how you look at it. So ask PC 59 questions. Who owns it? Who controls it?
Yeah, so
Very easy to define, eh?
you don't just take it on face value. So
Yeah. So you need to establish who benefits. If it rattles suspiciously, keep on wrapping, or escalate ASAP anonymously.
no. So remember, reporting requirements in terms of FICA is quite strict. So if you start to unwrap your client's corporate structure and there are any suspicious or unusual activities, then the accountable institution needs to report through the Go AML portal. So they'll know who you are. But what is important, and I think that's where you got your ribbons crossed, is you can't tip off. So if you report to the FIC, then you can't tell your client you think their structure is a little bit dodgy, and you told the regulators to look at them.
So it's also easy to cross some wires in between as well. It's important to read as much as you can, right?
Exactly.
So follow the ribbon. So you're getting ahead
And
of it
don't
in
cross
the steps. Ensure you understand the ownership chains, control rights, and decision-making powers within the entity. So in other words, follow the ribbon upwards until it ends at the last natural person.
Exactly.
The face.
The face. And then lastly,
Step 4. So step 4 is pretty straightforward. Stop at the last human or humans. Once you've identified all natural persons meeting ownership or control tests, we found the UBOs. Yeah, I don't know why OBOs are coming out here, but we need to figure out what that means. But remember, document how you got there. So the
Yes.
documentation serves as the bow and the name tag on the actual gift. And that bow and the name tag on the actual gift is important when it comes to saving your own skin.
Now, so maybe OBO in your head's the only beneficial owner, and it's because you're stuck on Ferrero Rocher with simple steps. But yeah, so OBO, UBO, I actually don't care what you call them, just as long as you know what you're supposed to do, and you
long as you
need
see a
to
human,
find the last human or human faces in that big corporate structure. So unwrapping UBOs, we'll start with private companies because that's usually the templates, well, the companies we see the most. Pty Limited, registered at the CIPC. And this is almost what we can call the classic Christmas box. It's that,
Yeah, so-
the stock standard Secret Santa gift.
Yeah, I mean, we said it's going to be repetitive. One quick shortcut, just ask yourself who ultimately owns the company and who ends up with a value, benefit, or has control. It's as simple as that.
Yes, so how do you do that?
Well, I'm sure you're going to show us now, so I'm not going to take away your thunder.
Answered like a politician. So you need to ask for a share certificate. Okay, so now I'm going to put you on the spot.
Cool.
So that first company, who is your UBO?
Well, I know you're trying to trick me, but that's very straightforward. So it's human shareholder, 100%.
How do you do that?
You need to identify the human shareholder, the 100%.
Yes, you ask for a share certificate.
Okay.
And then the other one with the two shareholders?
Well, that's also pretty straightforward. So we've got two Ferreros here. I mean, shareholder A and shareholder B. But obviously, I know you're trying to trick me again here because it doesn't say human shareholder, it just says shareholder A and B. So it could have other meanings as well. There could be entities, etc. involved.
Okay, so I'm going to keep it simple for you. Let's
Okay.
assume A and B are humans, then
So you're
they
not
are
trying to
your
trick me.
UBOs.
Okay, cool.
Yes. But if A was a trust, then that's not your UBO. You need to go level up. If B was a CC, then you know you need to go one level up too. But yeah, you've clearly been listening. Now we have a little bit of a more tricky one. So quickly have a look there. Who do you think our UBOs are?
Don't want to steal your thunder again, but I know you mentioned 5% in the slides before. So if it's straightforward without any thrills and frills or funny wording around it, it's human shareholder B and human shareholder A.
Okay, not C,
Not
because
Cs.
3%.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly unpack the percentage rule for everybody. So in PCC 59, the percentage of total ownership is usually a good indicator of controlling ownership over that legal person. So PCC 59 recommends 5% or more to be regarded as beneficial owners. So in the past, it used to be 25%. So whoever's been doing FICA for a while, we know back in the day we could stop at a 25%, but the problem is criminals gotten on to that rule and they started to abuse it. And also the 25% rule was amended to align with Reg 32A of the Companies Act and a few other sector and emerging risk assessments. So now you can't stop at 25% anymore. And if your RMCP still says 25%, maybe it's a good time to update it. And then if you want to follow the 5% rule as detailed in PCC 59, also a good idea to update your RMCP to say that you will, in all of your processes, follow the 5% rule. But important to remember, and
It's
this
always
is
a
now,
but.
there's
Yes,
always a but.
but.
But I now don't want people after today to say, oh, 5%, I'm going to stop FICA and then walk away. So it's a good indicator, but it's never an absolute rule, because if that 5% or 4.5% client is a high-risk client or a PEP, or they sit in a dodgy jurisdiction, or there's adverse media on them, then they're still a risk. And you still need to understand all the risks that link back to that person. And that 5% person can also be a director on one of the other companies in the structure, or they have the ability to exercise control over somebody else. So 5% is a good indicator, but it's not an excuse to stop your process to understand the bigger corporate structure you're dealing with. And like I've said a couple of times, and I'm going to keep on repeating myself because I want people to go and check their RMCPs to save themselves. But whatever you decide to do, your RMCP needs to reflect this, because if your RMCP says one thing and you do another thing, that's the quickest way to get a FICA fine. So always make sure what you do and what you say is aligned, or else you're in trouble. So yeah, theoretically now, if we look at that structure we just did, the 3% shareholder, if C has no other links to A or B or any other dodgy things, then you can almost only consider A and B as your UBOs, because C holds less than 5%. But like I said, don't ever be blinded by that 5% rule. It's not an absolute rule. If C can act on behalf of B, or if C can exercise control over ABC, then you should still regard them as a UBO, not per se on sort of ownership, but as control. So just imagine company ABC only has 2 directors and C is one of them. Then regardless of the fact that he only has 3% in shareholding, he has the ability to control the day-to-day of that company. So this is why you need to understand the legal structure. You need to read the organogram like you read a novel, basically.
And I think, you obviously alluded to earlier, it's just talking around the ongoing monitoring of this, because that rule stipulated 25% in the past, it's now 5%, and as we know,
Something can
loopholes are
happen.
loopholes. People find loopholes within loopholes within loopholes, and obviously after great listing, things have changed. That magnifying glass is a lot clearer now.
Exactly, and you can't use the rules and hide behind them. So logic still prevails, and you still need to make sure that you understand the bigger structure. So we know, most of the times it isn't as simple as a company with just 100% shareholder, and most of the time it gets a little bit tricky when companies are owned by other legal entities.
So I think companies owned by other legal entities, there we go again, the Russian nesting doll effect. Lani, I told you not to use this, but you had to bring up some childhood trauma here, but thank you very much for that. So trace the ownership up the chain. I think that's also important as well. So regardless of where you start, you have to continuously go up until you ignore all the actual company names and you actually reach the last natural person. There again, repetitive for what you've been saying, but when you're tracing upwards, you trace all the way till that smiley face. Well,
Exactly.
we don't know if it's going to be smiley till you find them, but...
You can smile when you're done.
So rule of thumb, if you're still looking for a registration number and not a face with an ID number, you're not done. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, if your UBO has a registration number, that's not your UBO. Then you've got a problem and you need to fix that. So, like we said, you're only allowed to stop when you find that last human face, and that human face will either be somebody who has ownership control or somebody who has control over the management. Okay, so here's a little bit of a more difficult, tricky one. So I'm going to put you on the spot again. Who's our UBO?
Okay, so now you asked me to do some math as well in between. So, this one is a little bit of a Ferrero to some extent because it's 50-50, and then you've got obviously, so it's human member A, human member B, human shareholder C. So yeah, it's basically 3 of them.
Yes, so remember CCs don't have shareholders, they have members, but a member is basically a shareholder. So these are some of those little technical nuances we need to know, but you are absolutely correct. So
Don't you wish everything was as simple, eh?
And that's actually, you stole my words, but this is the point. We will be super almost happy and lucky if our structures look like this, but they don't always. So sometimes the Russian nesting doll situation is a little bit more tricky. So in this instance, who do you think our UBO is?
So it could be simple because, you've got 1% shareholding, it's below the 5%. Without giving me too much information, I would say it's human shareholder C, who's the UBO.
Okay, so...
That's without information because I know you're going to throw something at me now.
Always. So theoretically, if you just apply PCC 59 verbatim, then that company A shareholder is less than 5. So on face value, it looks like human shareholder C is your only UBO. But what if company A is a law firm? And that company A law firm or director of the law firm is authorized to act on behalf of human C, where C, for example, can't act on their own behalf or don't want to and gave a power of attorney to company A. So then you need to understand the company A structure to understand who can actually control whatever happens in C. So this is an example of, on face value, apply the 5%, but always ask the question and understand how the bigger structure works and understand the nuances of all your clients. So a little bit more of a difficult structure is this guy. So who do you think the UBO is?
So obviously we're going to have to do math again.
Can you do it in your head or do you need help?
If you want to help me, you can, but this is my strength. So
Okay, so say the number and I'll test you.
So obviously 25% and then 50%, you've got 250% shareholders, it should be like 12%.
12 and a half, actually.
Okay. And then on company shareholder B, you've got, okay, so obviously 1 and 5%, but it's 75%, so it's just over 3%. And yeah,
3.7.
So it's shareholder D and it's shareholder E and human member A and human member B. So obviously there again, the definitions, see, I'm learning. So definitions, CCs are human members and companies or PTYs are shareholders.
Okay. No,
Well done,
good.
eh?
Yep, and your math isn't that bad. But now, if you look at the structure, then again, based on the numbers, then both human member A and B have more than 5%, so you have to go all the way there. They're the UBOs. C has less than 5%, so 3.75%, so not technically your UBO, except if there's some form of control. And then D and E. And then the tricky thing again that you now didn't spot is D and E aren't necessarily listed as humans on this organogram. So if you get an organogram that looks like this and you don't know if D or E are humans or not and you can't find IDs there, then you need to ask the questions and look through those levels.
So math and legal, what a perfect combination.
Exactly. And then sometimes the organogram looks like tangled Christmas lights. And I know most people lose their patience and sort of can't untangle the lights every December and just opt to buy new ones. You can't do that with UBOs. So here you need to apply some patience and you need to almost work through every line until you get to the last one. So if I ask you to identify the UBOs in this tangled thing, where will you start?
Maybe start with the first one, so that's 40%, so you know that you also know that a trust can't be a shareholder. You need to find the actual face there.
Exactly. So you're correct. So start almost line by line. So line 1 is company, and remember sort of company in pink. So TMI is our client. So to understand TMI, you need to understand company GHI, which is now owned by a trust, and that trust isn't your UBO. You need to look through that level. So firstly, you need to identify anybody who can control the company, and directors aren't necessarily UBOs, but like I said, they can exercise control over the entities, so we need to understand that. And then we go to the trust level. But again, this trust, it doesn't have a face or an ID. It has a trust deed that might be able to identify beneficiaries who've got faces. So the trust is your UBO, but like mid-level UBO. Then you look through it and you find the beneficiaries of that trust. They are usually listed in your trust deed, like we said in the beginning. If they aren't named by name, then you need to ask more questions, ask your trustees to confirm who your beneficiaries are. And then remember, the trustees are also almost authorized to act on behalf of that trust, so they've got control. And if your trustee is a legal entity, you need to look through that layer to try and find a human being after that. And then also founders are important because founders create the trust. So if you have a criminal founder, then you need to understand how they link back to the trust, and again, which risks they bring. So this is why when you look at a trust, you obviously identify the beneficiaries for ownership purposes, you identify the trustees for control, and you need to understand your founder, because depending on their relationship with your trustees and your beneficiaries, they can also almost have a level or a layer of control over this bigger structure. Then if we look at the UBOs of a trust.
Yes, so, you tried to test me on this as well. So essentially the founder is can also be known as the settler or the donor as well.
Yeah.
So essentially, who's started the
Who
the
created the trust?
trust, established,
Yeah, they're the
created.
reason the trust exists.
Yeah, then we look at the trustees. So trustees can be natural persons or legal entities within the trust structure. Then we look at the beneficiaries, named, unnamed, or discretionary. So I think discretionary being the word that we need to unpack a little bit in this one as well.
Yeah. So here, like I said, your beneficiaries can actually be named as John, Peter, and Paul in the trust deed, and then you know who they are. It could be that it's the children born from our marriage, but then you don't know who they are, so you need to ask the trustees who was born. Or it can be within the powers of the trustees to determine who benefits from it from time to time. So we've seen a lot of those examples where somebody leaves money to students or to somebody to go and study medicine or law or whatever. They're not named or unnamed, but it's within the discretion of the trustees to pick a candidate from time to time and pay for their studies. But here the power again sits with the trustees to determine who they are.
And then the control element. Anyone exercising control could be an accountant or a lawyer with a power of attorney. So I think that's where, obviously within the UBO's structure, that's where it becomes a little bit complicated. So obviously we're going to touch on that a bit more in detail as well as we go through some examples. But essentially the invisible beneficiary, if a trust has future beneficiaries, I think you've touched briefly on that as well, with no clarity, treat them as potential UBOs
And
record it.
Yeah.
So I think the recording element of it is important as well, just to say that obviously at this point, if they're not seen as a UBO, in the future they could be. So,
And again, it can't be a WhatsApp from the trustees confirming who your beneficiaries are. Here, unfortunately, we need a paper trail. So you need to get something in writing that you can save and share with the regulators if they do ask you from time to time.
just to show that you have noted it, even if you missed the change, or obviously you don't want to miss the change, but
Exactly. And remember, it's not always just because you have to have files full of documents when the regulators come. It might happen that you didn't know that your client was a naughty tortoise and they were doing things they weren't supposed to do, and the regulators might need the information to actually investigate. So we've had many of those examples in South Africa in the past, and I'm not going to sort of be Debbie Downer on Christmas on July and go into all of those bad examples. But it isn't just for on-sites. It is ultimately to make sure that we don't allow criminals to hide behind these sort of corporate layers and get away with the naughty things they're doing. So now if we jump back to the tangled Christmas lights, so if we then go to line number 2, so company JKL owns 11% of the client, TMI, and there we've got 4 shareholders. So 2 private companies, a listed company, and a CC. So what would you do there?
so if you look at the shareholders, 2 private companies, you're going to have to go one level up, but at face value, if you divide the companies by 4, it's all below the 5% rule, so it's sitting at like, 2.7%.
So again, 2.75%, so it is quite low, but you need to understand who sits behind those companies and listed companies and CCs, especially in these bigger structures, just to know that they're not linked somewhere else. And if they're not linked somewhere else, then you can almost confirm and establish that they don't have any control or ownership, and then you don't have to treat them like UBOs, you don't have to keep all the FICA, you don't need to get updated FICA every 3 or 5 years, depending on what your RMCP says.
But you're talking about listed companies, those examples come across more often than you would anticipate, because essentially some of the smaller companies which you wouldn't think have ownership by listed entities have these ownerships.
No, we see it a lot. So your client might be an unlisted PTY, but then your venture capitalist or private equity or all of these type of things, there's sometimes a bigger entity and sometimes a listed entity behind all of that owns a significant portion of shareholding there. So if that 2.75% was more than 5%, then obviously your 2 private companies, the listed company and the CC, were UBOs, and you'd have to look through them. And if you can't identify a human UBO, remember you still need to focus on control. But the listed company example is a good one, because Yeah, fortunately, and thank you for PCC 59, if you deal with a listed company UBO, you don't have to go and FICA every single shareholder of that listed company either. So the good news is most of those shareholders will definitely hold less than 5% there. So then you don't have to go and FICA every single person. Imagine if you had to sort of FICA one of the companies on the top 20 of the JSE. Like, fortunately, there's many shareholders, so you don't have to identify each and every one of them. But there you focus on control by other means or control over management, and usually you end up doing sort of KYC on all the directors of that listed entity because they're responsible for the day-to-day management. But remember, the facts matter, even if we look at this example. So of 25% shareholders of company JKL, if for whatever reason there was perhaps a coalition agreement or something else, a partnership even, in place between the four of them, together they would then still control a significant amount of shares, even if it's between company JKL and any of the other ones. So you always need to do the math. You need to understand how everybody in the bigger structure fits together. And now if we look at the last leg, so company MNO, so here it's line 3. So that company owns 49% of our initial client company. And that company is now owned by an NPO and a church.
I'll probably run.
So yeah, if we do the math, then it's 24.5%, so obviously more than 5%, and we need to focus here. But it's also tricky because churches take on various different forms of legal structure. So some churches are companies, some churches are CCs, some companies are still set up as trusts or foundations or any other weird corporate structures.
And
this is where
when they set up as well, because I know we got some creative NPOs and church structures
yeah, but
from
even
the past.
yeah, so churches set up in the 1700s, for example, and who haven't converted to companies yet. So, yeah, founding documents still written by hand. It gets tricky and interesting. But again, there you need to establish how they were established. Usually they aren't shareholders or UBOs, and then you look at whoever's responsible for the day-to-day management of the church. But remember to get all those documents in place. And then the same with NPOs. So we've mentioned in the past and even in other training sessions where unfortunately NPOs usually are charities or foundations, and they tend to do good things. But we've seen a lot of examples recently where NPOs are abused by criminals to do naughty things. And that's why you can't just think that an NPO won't do bad things. You still need to establish how they were created. So NPOs even, they can be established via a trust structure or company structure, and then you need to understand who controls it. Because remember, NPOs, they don't have shareholders like a traditional UBO structure. So they aren't shareholders that you need to identify, but you have to then see who the directors or the trustees of that structure are and who can control the structure. So who makes the decisions on where the money goes or what they do with the assets that belongs to that NPO.
Okay, so non-profit companies, organizations, there we go. We're talking about NPCs and NPOs again, but no price tag, but it's still a gift. So there's no monetary value, or it should be seen as no monetary value, but it's still seen as a gift that needs to be unwrapped. So no owners doesn't mean no UBOs. I think
exactly
that's sort of a tricky one to unpack.
UBO isn't just owner, but it's somebody who can exercise control.
So identify the structure, so company or trust, etc. Establish that first and foremost.
Yeah, so again, if you know what your gift is, and then you understand the wrapping.
Yeah, identify the people, secondly, directors, senior management, anyone with effective control, beneficiaries, trustees, founders, everyone who ultimately benefits in any shape, way, or form.
Exactly. Because importantly, if somebody can steer the sleigh or determine the destination, they need to be known.
What would you do with the self-driven cars?
Yeah, well, that's a different problem, but somebody, again, is in control of that car. So if you think about it, now that you open the car example, if you drive past one of those beautiful cameras that take a picture of you if you're too fast, the owner of that car usually gets the letter in the post or wherever saying that you've driven too far. So, and this is the same. It's not the car that gets the fine, it's the owner of the car. And if the owner can prove that they didn't drive the car, but somebody else drove the car, that's control. And the same year. So FICA doesn't link back, and UBO status doesn't link back to the structure or the car. It goes to the owner or the person who was driving. So ownership or control. So, yeah, if you drive a sleigh or if you drive a car, it's the same example that applies there. And the same almost applies with partnerships. So, with a partnership, you need to identify every partner who owns or controls that structure.
Yeah, so simple tests: who can bind the partnership or materially influence the decisions. We laugh and joke about this every time there's requirements that come in. But obtaining a copy of the partnership agreement is a non-negotiable requirement to determine the UBO. So
Exactly.
There's no hiding, eh?
No. So use this example. If you are dealing with a natural person as a client and you ask him for a copy of his ID and he says no, then you will not do business with him because you can't FICA him. And the same, if you're dealing with a partnership but they don't want to share a copy of the partnership agreement, then firstly, is it a partnership? Because if they can't prove that they're a partnership with the partnership agreement, then does it exist? And then secondly, what is in that partnership agreement that they don't want to share with you? Because then you should start to worry, because things shouldn't be secrets and people shouldn't be hiding behind corporate structures. But the important thing here is the 5% rule can also be applied with partnerships. So if somebody has less than 5% partnership interest, then you can apply the same UBO rules to them. So in summary...
Are we done?
No, this is just, summary of the bigger structure. We're still going to remember, recap and summarize at the end. But this is
I think
just...
everyone needs a 5-minute leg stretch now. you go for it. I'm sure we just want to get it over and done with.
But this is
Joking.
almost demonstrating how
Yeah.
long it takes to work through the UBO structure. But again, for good reason. You need to suffer through every layer. You need to know who you're dealing with. But coming back full circle now to this company, TMI, you take it branch by branch, you understand how they fit in, but the branches also don't happen in isolation. If you have shared company directors or owners throughout the structure, good news is you only have to FICA them once. So most people get excited if there's the same person popping up everywhere because you have to ask them for FICA docs once. But then you also need to figure out how control links there.
But I suppose it also comes down to choice and expectations. So, I mean, if you're choosing to work with the onion, understand the expectations of what it is, eh? And
if you want to eat onions, sometimes you need to cry. But in this structure now, after going through all of our layers, it's sort of clear that the beneficiaries of the trust will be UBOs. And then whoever controls the NPO and the church will also be our UBOs in this structure. And under normal circumstances, if there's nothing else that makes you stress or worry, then you don't have to worry about the UBOs on the middle level because they all fall under the 5% rule. Except, again, if there's coalition or other forms of control, so not an absolute rule. And then this brings us to another sort of tricky situation, and I touched on it, but where individuals with multiple layers of ownership or control pop up. So if you want to think about this one as almost a busy little elf, but look at this structure. So the company in pink will be your client, which is then owned by company 1, 2, 3. If you do your UBO, you see that shareholder A owns 100% of 1, 2, 3. Then you see there's a CC with 4%. But now, because it's less than 5, you don't stop there. You just ask the question. But you see there's 2 members. A, again, that popped up on 1, 2, 3, and then his wife. And then there's a trust that owns 56%, but that trust has 2 beneficiaries, A, again, and his minor child. So now you see A pops up everywhere with 40% in the one layer, 2% in this middle layer, and 28% at the end. So if you do all that math, then you see A as a UBO, who can exercise 100% control over the structure. 70% as a real direct UBO, and then the other 30% through influence of his wife, good luck, or a minor child. But potentially he's also a director or trustee on all of the other structures. So you can see he basically touches every layer And you need to understand why, and you then clearly need to get all your UBO KYC on A, because he ultimately controls that entire structure.
But I know even if the wife wants 2%, she ultimately is the main boss.
Depends on how their relationship works. So more layers almost creates more risk. So just remember, when there's cross shareholding, it's almost that gift that keeps on giving, because companies owning trusts and trusts owning other companies ultimately follow the money. Check the control and stop at the last humans, but silent controllers also matters. And this is a big red flag. If someone isn't listed in an organogram, but they call the shots, congratulations, you've then found a control-based UBO, and a little bit of a worry moment, because why would somebody not want to have shareholding, but they still have enough power to control that whole structure? So just ask questions, understand who you are dealing with.
Even if it scares you. So
But yeah, if it scares you, you need to escalate.
yeah, so let's look at layering and complex structures. So when is it important to escalate? Structures feel intentionally opaque. So there could be a bit of gray area between that as well. I mean, what would you define as structures that feel opaque?
It's when people try to hide things on purpose. So if they overcomplicate things, or if it could be done simpler and it doesn't, or you ask them for documents and they don't want to share documents. So
Or they say it's a poppy breach. Eh?
yeah, like I said, I've had people
That
who
was an
said,
interesting comment.
but yeah, and the thing is, most of you deal with KYC or FICA on a daily basis. You know what is normal and how normal structures look, but you also have an idea of when people hide things on purpose, or when they almost overcomplicate something to try and hide something. And there you need to trust your gut and listen to it.
So the other one to look at is everyone sits just below threshold. So we know that was worked in the past, obviously, when the rule was 25% and
Everybody had 24%.
yeah, but now that's obviously changed, and now we also saw some other interesting ways of how that sat within 2%
Yeah, so if you
shareholding.
now see everybody on 4.99%, then
Yeah.
also ask a question, because they probably had PCC 59 somewhere.
Yeah.
But that's important. So, just as much as we understand the rules because we have to comply, we've seen criminals who try and read the rules and interpret the rules and hide behind the rules. So just be wary of that.
Yeah, and then lastly, explanations feel rehearsed or inconsistent. So we've seen that where it's either rehearsed, where it's too perfect and
Too
it's
good to be true.
too good to be true, or it's inconsistent. I mean, we've had a recent one where we've had someone coming to us for a specific investment, which 5 minutes or 10 minutes into the conversation, then it became trust, then it became wills for international properties, and then eventually became wanting to bring funds from offshore. So what the meeting was set up for versus what it was completely inconsistent. So, when things like that happen, and if it's too good to be true, or if it feels that way, trust your gut, because it normally isn't. And we're seeing these things happen more and more often, obviously, with the tightening of the rules and grace thing being lifted. There's this bigger magnifying glass that's put on. So obviously, those monies that are stuck offshore, or those monies that have been pushed and can't come back in, not that easy anymore, eh?
But also don't fall for the excuses. So
Yeah.
if somebody said the dog ate my ID, then okay, great. Home Affairs is quite simple now. Go and get a new ID. So you can't not FICA a person because they can't give you an ID. Or and I've heard it in the past, we moved and we lost our trust deed. So now you can't FICA my trust. Like, get a copy. The Master's Office has copies. I've had to deal with a trust document in the past where somebody's kids got hold of it with crayons. Luckily enough, you could still read who the beneficiaries are, and they also made a plan to get a clean copy of their trust deed. And we know life happens, but also criminals know we feel sorry for people and we might fall for the excuses, but don't. So if they say they can't produce the hard copy ID now because the dog ate it, they do have a copy saved on their phone. You can accept it, but only for as long as it takes them to go and get a new ID. So, and I mean, Home Affairs, kudos to them. It is quite quick and easy to get a new ID now. So
Yeah, but we also,
nobody's got an excuse.
Yeah, there's no excuse, but we're also seeing an uptake of these criminals looking for more softer targets. So those that are not necessarily asking the the questions up front or poking that bear normally get caught up in things that they don't want to be caught
Yeah,
up
you don't
in.
want to be so soft that you turn into a victim too. So
Yeah.
know what the rules are, follow the rules, know what your RMCP requires, and don't go and break and bend the rules because, yeah, please just continue to trust your gut. If something feels off, it usually is. And please don't ever allow money laundering or terrorist or proliferation financing Grinch to steal your UBO processes. So rather report, remember you have to, and protect your AML or CTPF safeguards. So there's kindness, but kindness can be abused, and we don't want criminals to abuse anyone's kindness. So this brings us to adequacy, accuracy, and the importance of up-to-date information, especially when we deal with beneficial ownership. So most importantly, please don't embarrass yourself and allow re-gifting when it comes to FICA. So just imagine this situation. You get a gift, like one of those Secret Santa gifts, and you don't check what it is. And then next year comes and you forgot to buy a new Secret Santa gift for someone else, and you remember you still have this thing in a box in a drawer somewhere. And then you give it to someone and it turns out either broken or expired or weirdly inappropriate.
I see some people in your team laughing, so
Yeah,
are they
maybe
guilty?
it's happened in the past.
Okay.
But this is almost exactly as embarrassed as you would be if this happens in real life. This is what could happen when we deal with FICA, when the regulators ask you to provide sample files and you sit with outdated UBO info. So if you get FICA from a client who's got it in a folder somewhere, they send it to you, you assume it's all the documents you need, but you don't check, and it sits in a folder somewhere or on your phone in a WhatsApp or an email, and you open it when it's too late and all the documents aren't there. It's the same level of embarrassment, except now you get a fine. So PCC 59 requires CDD documents to always be adequate, accurate, and up to date. So adequacy means it needs to be good enough to understand who you're dealing with. So if you only have 2 of the layers of a big corporate structure and you don't know who your UBO is, that's not good enough. If you get a copy of an ID document, but it's so faded and so, like, it looks like somebody made 25 copies of it back in 1995 and then scanned it, like, you can't see a face, you don't know who that human is, you can't accept it. If you can't read the ID number on the document, then that's not a good enough copy. It's not adequate, you can't use it. It also needs to be accurate. So accurate means it needs to be correct and reliable always. So if your trust was created in 1925, I can bet you your beneficiaries or your trustees might not be alive anymore. So you can't just use your 1925 trust deed. You need to make sure you get an up-to-date letter of authority to know who the current trustees are, and ask the question. The trust might have been amended 6 times in the interim and they didn't give you those amendment documents. If you don't have the full pack of trust docs, then you don't have the full trust deed you need to work with. It's like, I've dealt with a client who liked her ID photo she got in 1986, and she doesn't like a new card photo, and now she still wants to use the 1986 ID that doesn't even have a barcode. Like, great, I like your picture and well done, and you look beautiful 40 years ago, but I can't use that ID. It's not accurate, it's not reliable, you don't look like that anymore, except in your head, so kudos, but we can't help you. And that's why up-to-date information is important. Just as you can't use last Christmas leftovers and people will judge you for it, you can't use FICA documents you got 10 years ago. Because again, there is a responsibility to do ongoing monitoring, to get updated FICA documents from time to time. If you know the directors changed on a company or the trustees changed, then you can't use the old documents you still have. There is a legal responsibility to get updated documents, but there's also a responsibility on you to know who you're dealing with. And there are risks if you don't know who you're dealing with. You can turn into a victim of a criminal, so make sure you have updated documents always.
Cool, so no mystery boxes.
No, no surprises.
What adequate really means, okay, let's look at what it doesn't mean first. A single name on a form. Is that adequate?
No, nobody's Madonna except Madonna. So we can't just have a single name. We need ID numbers, things to identify people with.
And can I say on my record if I see file, or can I use the WhatsApp for, because I don't see how that will
You
be.
can, but you'll get into trouble because what happens if you lose your phone and you lose all the WhatsApp records and now you can't prove FICA when the FICA asks you for FICA?
This is also it's a very common one as well. I mean, the product provider has it.
Well,
Can
good
we
for
say
them.
that?
Good for them. Product provider won't be fined, but I can bet you your RMCP doesn't look like your product provider's RMCP. The FICA requirements might differ, and you still need to keep it because you are still an accountable institution in your own name.
Cool. So I hope that's clear to everyone out there. Even, I mean, if you want to say that, ideally you shouldn't be saying that.
Well,
but
do it at your own risk.
yeah. So adequate simply means you can explain who the UBO is, what they or why they qualify as a UBO, and how you identify them. So it's 3 key words which we don't only use in these terms, but
For
the
anything else.
who, the what, also the who, the why, and the how is used in everyday life. That's the questions we ask ourselves. So all we need to do is implement it and
Yes. So who the UBO is, and again, you don't know who they are if you don't know why and how. So, yeah, do those 3 steps, and then you literally have nothing to worry about.
so there again, back to the previous comment, and we're repeating ourselves again. So if someone asks you who ultimately owns or controls this client, you should be able to answer without rummaging. I learned a new word, rummaging through old wrapping paper.
Exactly. Or old WhatsApps, or old emails, because
All files, or ink dated trust deeds from 1970s.
exactly. So most importantly, accurate means no guessing games.
Eh? So common Christmas slip-ups. Trust deed says one thing, onboarding form says something completely different.
Yep.
So
So
we see that
somebody
often
is
as well.
hallucinating, or somebody is making sort of assumptions, or they're trying to sneak something in.
Yeah, then the other one being shareholder changed, but records didn't. So
So
that's often,
how did a shareholder change if there are no records? I mean, it's not effective if there's no resolution or you don't amend an agreement. So,
Yeah.
a change is only relative to the amount of paperwork that confirms that.
and then control shifted, but no one updated the file. So ongoing monitoring.
Exactly. So bad admin means bad FICA. So, if control shifted, but there's no paperwork to demonstrate it, did it really? And now you've got bigger problems because now there's information mismatches.
And then, I mean, this is quite self-explanatory as well. Accurate information, matches official documents, reflects current reality, is internally consistent. So I think in the perfect world, which obviously we're not living in, that's what we'd love to
We are
get.
hoping. But the funny thing is, you're saying that, but we are moving towards almost an improved world. And I know a lot of people don't want to see grey listing as a good thing, but it did allow a lot of information sharing to be available to us. So in the past, UBO shareholder information wasn't available through the CIPC. Rules changed, and now you can confirm who the shareholders are. So if somebody tells you who the shareholders are and you're not too sure, you can't read the organogram, you can always go to the CIPC and double check who the shareholders are. The Master's Office shares a lot of information. You can confirm what a trust name or number is. You can check who the trustees are. Some of the trusts have enough information available now where copies of the trust deeds are available. So there are multiple sources of information where you can go and double check the information that you are provided. And it's actually, it's wonderful to know that you can trust your client, especially when you can verify the information they gave you against something else.
So the long and short of that is it is available. You just need to know where to look.
And find it.
Cool. So Santa's test, if documents contradict each other, one of them is, thanks for changing the word, Delani, one of them is clearly a lump of coal.
Exactly, and you should be worried. If the documents you get doesn't tie up to official records, then you've got problems. Somebody's lying or something didn't happen, but you can't accept it because now you have 2 different versions of the truth and you're not too sure who the UBO is. So what up to date really means is, like I said, you can't re-gift last year's Christmas gift. So where the trouble usually starts and the information's out of date is when UBO details are only confirmed at onboarding. So I don't want to sound like that compliance officer, but we have to do ongoing monitoring. Again, it's a legal requirement. You can't get away from it. The frequency you can determine by yourself, and your RMCP needs to say it. but you don't just establish a UBO once. Every now and again, when things change, you need to do ongoing monitoring and get up-to-date documents, because structures change. Like life happens, things change, but if the structures change but you don't update your records, you're going to be in trouble. Trustees resign, directors resign. If you don't update those documents, you're in trouble. And ownership can never shift quietly. Like, it's not something that slips and falls. So when you change ownership, there's share certificates that change, or trust deeds will be amended. So documents that prove how all of this happened, and if your records don't reflect what is currently the situation, you're in trouble again. Because almost the biggest Christmas truth is you cannot re-gift old information and call it compliance. And if a structure changes, then clearly the wrapping changed, or there's new layers of wrapping, and you need to open that up again to know who you are dealing with.
Cool. So I think even if nothing changed, confirm it.
Yes.
You may not reuse old now it's gone to a different word. Now. That's interesting. Without checking for accuracy. Assume nothing has changed. So there again,
always verify.
We can't assume. And I know you hate that word, and I've learned not to assume anything. So always verify. Copy and paste prior explanations.
Indefinitely. Yeah, so if you've had a client for 20 years, but the FICA pack stayed the same for 20 years because you just
then there's something wrong
copy every 5 years, well, you're definitely in trouble.
Cool.
What you need to do is continuously check, confirm, update, and document. So again, you need to make sure that you understand your client's financial situation, their structure. I'm curious to know how you can provide a record of advice, or even just advice if you don't exactly understand your client's structure. So remember, things never stay the same, and even if they do, the confirmation matters, because that's how you demonstrate to the regulators that you know your client is. That's how you can almost sleep at night, because you know you are dealing with, and it all ties back into proper outcomes-based results.
I should throw coffee in again. Eh? So let's look at the trigger events. So I know, there again, a lot of things are repetitive, so I'm just going to run through the trigger events. So the client structure changes, right? So that's a trigger event. You have to obviously update once any client structure has changed. Shareholders, trustees, directors, etc. change, so that's pretty self-explanatory.
You get new share certificates, new letters of appointment for the trustees, new CIPC documents reflecting the new directors.
Control shifts, so even if it's informally done, so I think that's a tricky one, yeah.
Well, informally needs to be followed up in some form of writing. So again, you can't informally appoint a director, but at least if somebody says we are going to change directors by the end of the month, that's a cool indication to start to get your pack together and know that you will have to get a new CIPC document confirming who a new director will be.
So a review cycle is reached. Obviously, we know we get different levels of CDD or EDD. So is that...
Hey, I'm impressed you remember the big words. Yeah, so EDD,
and I remember the abbreviations.
And you get them right every 2 times. So an ECDD is an enhanced client due diligence for your high-risk clients, and that's usually at least once a year. And then if you risk rate your clients low or medium, you decide your own review cycles, but at least every 3 years or 5 years or whatever your cycle is, you need to at least ask the question and see if something's changed, and if it did, you need to get the new documents.
And then something feels off, even if it's just a little. If it feels off, it's off.
Trust your gut.
Trust your gut. It's as simple as that. Well, maybe it's not as simple, but I suppose, like, depending on how long you've been in the industry, when something feels a little bit offish, your instinct matters. So if it feels like regifting, it probably is. Eh?
So now the important question is the naughty versus the nice list.
Should I do the naughty list?
Where do you, well, this is almost a game I want everybody sort of here and online to play, but just after everything we've said, just almost reassess and self-assess where you think your current CDD processes are. So you will be on the nice list if you know you have recent updated documents for all of your clients. If you can demonstrate a clear ownership trail for every single juristic client, if control is explained, not just guessed or assumed or implied, but you physically went through the processes and you can document that that is how you've established that somebody has control over the structure, and all of your reasoning is documented. Like I said, if it's not documented, it's not done, and you don't know how important the documentation process is until you actually need to go and find something. So make sure that you update your processes, because you can read through the naughty list.
Yeah, so I mean, the naughty list is made up of a lot of the reasons why we get FICA or the processes in a certain
And
way.
hopefully nobody's ever used one of these.
Same as the last time, so that shouldn't be. I think. Listen, we
Nothing's
saw it.
ever the same as last time.
No, but I mean, like if you look at what's happened, and when it comes to CDD or know your client, a lot of other institutions accepted it, and obviously that's where that excuse came from. Provided it, it's the same as the last time. What's different? I mean, if you look at the fines, you'll understand what's different. So that happens quite often. Well, hopefully not so much
I'm
anymore.
curious, when the green books fall away and everybody needs to use cards, how many, same as last time, ID books will still be accepted even though it's not a thing anymore?
Yeah, so outdated organograms, I think that's also, it's the onus is upon obviously the conversation and educating the client as to why. Missing updates, that's just, it could be a few things there. It's ongoing due diligence, obviously, so obviously that's also, that happens quite often as well. And then contradictory records. You're saying one thing in your record keeping and you're providing us with something else. And if the two don't match up, and obviously if there's an issue later on, you could be liable. Eh?
I've seen an example where the same human has two ID documents. Again, I don't know if she wanted to be younger, but she had two ID documents with a 10-year difference between the two. So, two birthdays, same photos. So, when you start to see those things, then, it makes you question FICA a little bit more.
Yeah, but then I think the last one as well, we never asked. I don't
You
think
should
we can,
ask. You can't hide behind
I don't
that.
think we can get away with that. Maybe like in the past, like 10, 15 years ago.
Never.
Yeah, but you definitely can't say that now.
No.
I mean, you've got your own internal compliance as well that will look at your.
It's the quickest way to a fine.
Yep.
So, quick recap and summary, and this is now the real recap and summary,
Okay, sure.
but I promise. So, you've seen this slide in the past, but to ensure FICA compliance, you literally just have to do everything that's on this one screen. It's not that difficult, it's not that much, it's quite simple if you look at it this way. So you have to do client due diligence, which means you have to identify and verify, screen and risk grade, do ongoing monitoring. Trigger events happen from time to time and it will impact your client's risk rating. You have to keep records for 5 years. You have to report, but remember you can't tip off, and you have to do training to ensure that you understand what you need to do. So these are the only legal duties you have to comply with, and you have to make sure that it's detailed in your RMCP. But when we deal with juristic entities, the rule book's still the same. So those CDD requirements for identify and verify, screen and risk rate, and ongoing monitoring is the same. It's just the layers of wrapping paper that adds a little bit of complexity. But hopefully after today's session, you understand how you unpack them layer by layer. You know what you need to do. But hopefully after today, you can never stop at a juristic entity. You have to go all the way to the top, find that last phase, the ultimate beneficial owner, UBO. So not an OBO like Jathan keeps on saying. And whatever you do, it needs to be documented in your RMCP, and everything you do, it needs to be what is documented in your RMCP. So,
Why do I feel like you're smiling at everyone, obviously, from our office? Are you going to walk around and ask spot questions
Yes.
from next week?
Yep, they must know, and now you've spoiled my surprise. But ultimately, this Christmas in July, I do believe the gift was confidence, because I don't want you to memorize legislation or become a forensic investigator.
Or use the term OBO?
You just need to ask better questions. Notice the inconsistencies and escalate early, and always, always, always document your thinking.
UBO identification isn't about presenting the perfect gift. It's about knowing what's inside the wrap box. In this case, it's nothing. As you can see,
You've
I
opened
tested
one.
it. But it's about being curious. So I was curious, and I was consistent while ensuring attention to detail. But most importantly, it's about documenting your favorite word, learning everything. I didn't document anything that I looked in there because there was nothing. If you can unwrap a Christmas present without any instructions like we all do, you can identify UBO. I got it right this time. You just need the determination to go to the last layer. And there's different ways of, obviously, as we mentioned before, of unwrapping a gift.
Step by step.
You can either do it step by step or you can tear it apart. So the choice is ultimately yours. It's all on the back of the determination that you put in and the level of scrutiny. So it's simple, not so simple, but
Hopefully it's simpler after this session.
so hopefully there's some method to the madness, eh?
Exactly. But on that note, happy, Merry Christmas in July, everyone, and happy UBO unwrapping.